Hello and welcome to Turning Point Tactics, the competitive Kill Team 40k podcast and YouTube channel focused on giving you the strategies and tactics to siege initiative every turning point. I'm your host Ryan and I'm here to help give you tips and tricks to elevate every part of your Kill Team experience. So no matter if you're a casual or competitive player, there should be something here for you. Ultimately, the goal for all of us is to become better opponents and have more fun in the game, and Turning Point Tactics is here to help you do exactly that. Before we begin, I want to give a massive shout out to my patrons. You guys are incredible and I hugely appreciate the support you give me. If not for the support of the patrons, the channel simply wouldn't be what it is. If you too are interested in supporting the channel, there's a few ways you can go about doing so. Firstly, you too can join the Patreon, where you'll get exclusive access to the Discord, Patreon priority questions, early access to content, exclusive content and tournament rewards. Secondly, if you find yourself buying Kill Team goodies or hobby supplies, you can use our affiliate links. This means with every purchase you make, a little bit comes to the channel. It'll cost you nothing, but help keep us and the show going. Finally, you can always support for free without spending a penny. It's as simple as hitting the subscribe button, liking the video, and sharing amongst your local community. Telling your friends about us is a great way to connect the communities together, share lessons, and help elevate everyone's game. As always, we're keen to hear your thoughts and feedback, so don't leave that comment box empty. Let us know what you think, maybe we've missed something, or maybe you have a better strategy. Drop a comment and let us know. Once again, thank you for your support. With all that said, let's get into it. Enough clowning around. On this episode of Threat Guide, we're talking about the Void Dancer Troupe. This 8 operative kill team has 67 wounds, 3 APL, a weapon skill and ballistic skill of 3+, a team-wide 4+ invulnerable save, and has 8 activations. So let's get straight into talking about their strengths. Firstly, they're an extremely manoeuvrable kill team. Every operative having access to the fly keyword means they can move across terrain with relative ease. This is clearly more impactful in some terrain than others, such as Octarius Walls where they can leap straight across, or on the new Blades Decima maps. This, combined with having team-wide 3 APL, means that they can move and dash every turning point, and 9 inches of unrestricted movement is massive in this game. This combination of APL and manoeuvrability makes the team highly unpredictable to play against, with their operatives being able to provide a variety of threats during their activation. You'll often see fly best used to stage on vantage points and generate one-way charges, but it can also be used into the dark to get over models blocking hatchways, or on open board to fly over the base of models holding shut doors. The team's faction ability is Sadath. This lets them choose from a variety of abilities to buff their pivotal role. The pivotal role is a single model chosen at the start of the first strategy phase. These abilities include the ability to fall back for one less action point, the ability to strike with a normal hit as if it were a critical hit in combat, the ability to reroll an attack dice on a shooting attack, the ability to add 1 inch to their charge range, or retain a defense dice when not in cover. Void Dancer Troupe have the ability to reassign the pivotal role to the lead player's performance lead ability, and when doing so, they can choose a different allegory or buff to use. But the fun doesn't stop there. If they can add 4 marks to their performance tally, the buff becomes team-wide. This faction ability gives the team a lot of flexibility, able to increase their damage output in melee, shooting, or their own survivability, or have increased movement potential. It can also have great synergy with some of their tactical ploys, such as Murderous Entrance, forcing that critical hit and allowing them to strike twice on entering combat. Now let's talk about Domino Field. For just 1 CP, this strategic ploy allows you to lose all of your friends in Kill Team, but it also has the benefit of giving you super conceal across your team. For it to trigger, however, you do have to be within 1 inch of a terrain feature and more than 6 inches from the active operative. The added bonus of the strategic ploy is it treated as a conceal order even if you have an engage order. This can allow Void Dancer Troupe to hide quite literally in plain sight. Luckily GW caught onto this, and in the balanced data slate they've increased the cost to 1+ for each time you use it, i.e. the second time will cost 2 CP and the third time will cost 3 CP. Although the ability to deny an entire Kazakin team shooting at you for an entire turn is priceless. Next, let's move on and talk about how good this team is doing spike damage. With most of their guns having access to the rending keyword, you either seem to whiff or do a significant amount of shooting damage. With a damage profile of 3-4, it becomes surprisingly effective at killing 8 wound models. But they also have fantastic spike damage in melee. With the Kiss having a critical damage of 7 and a normal damage of 3, they can do a surprising amount of burst damage on entry to combat. Combine that with the Murderous Entrance tactical ploy, and suddenly they can be hitting you for 10 damage before you even know it's happened. Unfortunately, it doesn't end there. As for 3 equipment points, they can increase the normal damage of that Kiss by 1, making it 4-7, and that's 11 damage on entry of Murderous Entrance, which is enough to kill most things in the game. Another thing that this team is great at is objective control. Having team-wide 3 APL, it means they can very easily contest almost all the central objectives and are really good at playing the primary game. This can force 2 APL teams to overcommit models into the centre board, which opens themselves to the possibility of double kills. This team also has access to that team-wide 4-up invulnerable save, and this makes them surprisingly durable against all the AP threats the Imperium have to offer. Combine this with the Sadath tragedy and being able to auto-retain a defence dice, and the Prismatic Blur strategic ploy to be able to reroll a defence dice, and suddenly these pesky clowns don't go down. This team also has access to both the Seek and Destroy and Recon archetypes, as well as Infiltration, but primarily the first two, as they're the best in the game. This is supported by having access to some great TAC ops. Mythic Play, Faction TAC Op 1, is usually a guaranteed 2 free VP, as acquiring performance tally points is relatively simple and requires them just to play the game. Finally, one major buff that this team received over the compendium version of Harlequins was the addition of the Death Jester. This allows them to have a long-range shooting threat that forces their opponent to be careful in deployment, or risk a 2-inch torrent shot from across the map. So all in all, this team is a highly manoeuvrable, unpredictable threat with big spike damage, can be surprisingly durable when you don't expect it, and scores really well. What's not to love? So let's talk about some of their weaknesses. Firstly, it's their reliability. We talked about spike damage being great, but also sometimes it just does nothing at all. And this team has that in spades. Usually the Void Dancer player has to choose what they want to be good at, be that shooting, melee or durability, and stack all their bonuses to match that. This usually means, based on which Sadath they have chosen, you know what threat you should be reliably expecting. But let's come back to that spike damage. If you have the ability to reduce damage, have a feel no pain, or just ignore damage once per game, that can be particularly brutal to face as this team. These operatives are best dealing out a lot of damage very quickly, but not taking much in return. And these abilities mean that happens. Although on paper you might think ignoring all the rules makes this team really easy to play with, but actually making sure you choose the correct Sadath to maximise your reliability for where you need it against that specific opponent is critical. Incorrect Sadath choices can effectively cost you the game. If the Void Dancer player doesn't stack their abilities into their defensive profile, then this team becomes absolute glass cannons. With only 8 wounds and that 4-up save, which can be particularly swingy, they can fall apart really quickly, and therefore they are very, very fragile by nature. But this fragility also exists in melee. This team does not enjoy trading damage, therefore prolonged combats are not good for them, or fight or strike on death is also not good for them. If you can get the charge off against them and be the attacker, this also works out significantly in your favour. This is a team that definitely likes to be on the offensive and not on the defensive. These guys also suffer the standard elite problem of being able to mitigate against your opponent's hot rolls. Occasionally, if they just roll 4 crits, there's literally nothing you can do to save a clown from death, even with that invulnerable save. Speaking of elite problems, this team is only 8 activations, and therefore an intelligent opponent can set up multiple threats in Turning Point 2 to ensure an effective trade in their opening salvos. As we said, this team likes to be on the offensive, and therefore, if you can get them on the back foot by taking out some of their key models before they activate, it's going to work well in your favour. But even if these models don't die, there are certain things that they really don't like. For instance, being injured is a significant penalty for them. Hitting on 3s with little or no rerolls is already an issue when it comes to reliability. Forcing them to hit on 4s, however, makes their reliability absolutely tank. When it comes to roster choices, they can choose between a variety of weapons to either increase that reliability or add additional other keywords to help their performance in melee. However, a 20-man roster doesn't allow you to take all of these options, and therefore they'll have to make some hard decisions as to what keywords are most important for them on the day. Next, this team has some amazing ploys, but they have to manage their CP budget very effectively. If they pop Domino Field too early, they can often find themselves having to pay too much of a CP tax to use it in later rounds. Each of their tactical ploys can be amazing in the right instance, but they need to make sure that they're using the right ones at the right time, and they don't waste that CP, which is such a valuable resource for them. And although they do have multiple ways to generate additional CP, Void Dancer players still get through it very, very quickly. Finally, Void Dancer Troupe only have access to one traditional blast weapon in the Prismatic Grenade. However, they do have multiple ways to achieve double kills, such as the Shrieker Cannon Torrent or the standard 3 APL Charge, Fight and Shoot. So that covers off all their weaknesses, and let's move into some of their gotchas. Firstly, we have to begin with that Domino Field. You might see them putting models in light terrain on engage on the first turning point and think to yourself, I'm about to get some easy kills, and then for 1 CP, suddenly they're on super conceal and you can't shoot them at all. Due to the increased CP cost though on turning point 1, this is now rare, but it's something to be mindful of when you're positioning models for Turning Point 2, that the shots that you think might be easy or guaranteed at the start of the Turning Point can be turned off for a single CP. Next, we need to talk about the Death Jester and his Shrieker Cannon. For 2 AP, it has the ability to activate a torrent profile and therefore hit multiple targets in a row. A sneaky way this can be used is by using a scouting phase dash and then place the Death Jester within 6 inches of a mid-board vantage point. Their first activation can be flying to that vantage point and then doing that 2-inch torrent across your deployment zone. Alternatively, they can wait until their last activation and do the same thing, and then use the opportunity to fire some Overwatch into your backlines again. This is a fantastic way for the Death Jester to pick up some multi-kills and even triple kills. Unfortunately, the fun doesn't stop there, because this weapon is 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, 4/5 damage, and rending. Now you're probably thinking, why is that so important? But on Into the Dark, if you have a torrent weapon, it suddenly becomes lethal 5. Pair that with the rending, and you're getting a whole lot of crits straight away. It also has a special ability called Humbling Cruelty, which means that if you lose any wounds as a result of one of these shooting attacks, you're counted as injured until the end of the turning point. Therefore, if they get a large torrent off, even if they don't kill you, there's a potential for them to cripple your team on Turning Point 1 and stop you reaching the objectives that you need to. And if the Void Dancer player is feeling particularly spicy, they can even spend 4 equipment points to give it 1 mortal wound for each critical hit that it rolls. That can be a surprising amount of damage on lethal 5 and rending. Next, let's talk about Murderous Entrance. This tactical ploy costs 1 CP and can be used on an operative that's performed a charge action. It allows them to strike with a critical hit and then immediately resolve a second attack dice. And that could be potentially 2 critical hits if they've got lucky on their dice. But more often than not, it's a critical followed by a normal. Now you might be thinking, well, maybe they won't roll a crit, but as long as they're in the epic allegory for their pivotal roll, they can resolve a normal hit as if it was a critical hit and then trigger Murderous Entrance. This is important as it can work for a lot of breakpoints, i.e. doing 7 damage crit straight away, followed up by 3 regular damage, means that they can deal 10 damage before you get to react. And that means they can one-shot a model and ensure they don't take any reciprocal melee damage. But more often when you see this used is in the elite matchup and when they're trying to kill intercessors. They use upgraded equipment to increase the normal damage of their kiss and then hit for 7 damage, followed up by a 4 normal damage hit. They then take whatever damage in return before issuing another 4 damage. This allows them to do 15 damage in 2 hits, which is enough to kill even the strongest of Space Marines. But let's talk about some other abilities the Void Dancers have, and we haven't yet touched on their Psyker, the Shadow Seer. They have access to a variety of psychic powers, but the first one we should talk about is Fog of Dreams. This has 2 unique abilities. One is turning off the GA2 characteristic of a model, forcing it to be used as GA1. And secondly, it delays their activation by a number equal to a D6 result that you roll. This can allow the Void Dancer player to delay key threats that you've set up and give them some breathing space to be able to figure out how to defeat them later on. Next, let's talk about the Mirror of Mind psychic ability. This allows a Void Dancer player to deal out a random amount of mortal wounds, but averagely 2 to 3. They can select a model in the Shadow Seer's line of sight, and then both players roll 6d6, and then for each matching result, you take a mortal wound. Most commonly this is used to apply chip damage during Turning Point 1 whilst the Shadow Seer is on conceal, but also can be used to finish off models that are left on a few wounds remaining. But there's a few other sneaky ways this can be used. Note, you only have to be in line of sight and it's not a shooting attack, and therefore this can be used to chip wounds off models in melee. This can be very effective at changing the breakpoints required for that melee combat, allowing a more favourable combat for the Harlequin player later. The Shadow Seer can also use Veil of Tears psychic action to give one of their models cover when it's more than 6 inches from an active operative. But it can also be used to deny charges outside of 6 inches from it. This is very good for them being able to set up those one-way charges we talked about, allowing them to stay on the offensive. Therefore, the main thing to look out for is the Shadow Seer activating early in a turning point and denying 2 threats. 1, by delaying a shooting model's activation, and 2, by stopping a melee model being able to charge the model it wants to outside of 6 inches. Although rare, if that shuts down both of your main threats during a turning point, that can be pretty devastating to face on the tabletop. Next, let's talk about some movement shenanigans. Players love to use operatives to block doorways, such as an Octarius or Chalnath, or block hatchways on ITD. Unfortunately, with the fly keyword, these pesky clowns can move straight over your model and into your backline, so be aware you're not holding anyone out when you position them that way, but they can still block you with their base. The key thing with this is the only way you can screen them out is stopping them from being able to place their base, but with 25mm base, it's pretty easy for them to achieve that. Okay, next, let's talk about some melee mischief. Void Dancers have the strategic ploy Kegarat's Jest, which means when you go to resolve a normal hit against them in melee, they get to roll a d6. If the result is equal to or less than the weapon skill of the enemy operative, that hit becomes a parry instead. Critically, however, this only works against normal hits and not your critical hits, therefore lethal 5+ is great, or just rolling straight 6s. But this can really swing a fight, particularly if it's an 8 wound operative fighting an 8 wound operative. When you're trading 4 damage at a time, if they force you to parry, it can potentially mean that you die on the charge when you weren't necessarily expecting it. You might think that you can tie up these clowns in melee by charge blocking them, but unfortunately they have an answer for that as well. For 1 CP, they can activate the Capricious Roll. This enables them to perform dash and charge actions whilst engagement range of enemy operatives, so they can charge out and fight someone else, or dash back and shoot you in the face. Let's move on and talk about some of the equipment options. The Prismatic Grenade. Although this team only has access to 1 grenade, this grenade is actually pretty damn good. With 4 attacks hitting on 3s and 3/4 damage, and blast 2, it hits harder than your standard frag grenade. What makes it even better than that is it has access to the stun keyword, and therefore a single critical hit can apply -1 APL to a variety of models. Combine this on ITD, where having the blast keyword gives you lethal 5, and you're almost guaranteed to hit multiple models with -1 APL. This can be used in a variety of ways, as an alpha strike to deny a whole turn of movement or potential to get on objectives, or as a last activation to swing an objective control from one team to the other by forcing you to either be -1 APL with 2 models going down to 2, or -1 on 1 to contest it with 3 APL. My personal favourite is using that first option to hit 2 models with it, reduce their APL on objective control, and then steal objectives from beneath their feet. Okay, now let's move on to the final gotcha, and it's their faction ability, the Sadiaths again. Not just does this have the ability to give them VP during a turning point, but also CP. So you might think that you've denied them the ability to do all their special funky rolls, but then suddenly they put off their last performance tally points and they get a mid-turning point CP buff. In sum, this team have a lot of abilities to catch you out and can really keep you on your toes. So let's talk about some potential counters and how best to play against this kind of team. Firstly, you need to deny double kills. This is pretty much a staple against any elite team, but with this team it's particularly important. They can trade really efficiently, and they want to try and force those double kills early so they have enough models to carry on playing the objective game whilst you struggle. Critical to this is understanding what spacing you need and where you need it. You want to force them to lose clowns every time they try to trade, especially with unreliable melee or unreliable shooting, where there's a potential to only get 1 kill with each attack. Therefore, force them to do a charge, fight and shoot rather than giving them easy access to torrent shots or prismatic grenade explosions. Next, you need to wait out their activations. These are explosive 3 APL models who can easily pick up kills on turning point 1. So, delay your activations, wait, see where they move, and then position accordingly to maximise your trading potential on the next turning point. But remember the ability of Fog of Dreams and Veil of Tears to shut down 2 threats at once, and make sure you don't give them the easy ability to turn off your threats. If you have the ability in your team to flex between shooting and melee, look to see what Sadiaths they're using and then try to prioritise your threats accordingly, or spread your threats to have a combination of both throughout the kill zone. If you are a melee only team, however, make sure you think about that Kegarat's Jest and how you're going to best deny it. Lethal 5 or combat support to increase your weapon skill to therefore make sure that it's harder for them to parry you out is going to be paramount to your success. If you're a shooting team, you need to make sure you deny their ability to hide in melee and achieve double kills or charge out of melee to kill critical targets. A good way to achieve this is to have counter punches set up behind. A counter punch is where you have a melee model within charge range of your own shooters who are up threat, or a shooting model that can shoot into combat. We've talked about the fragility of this team and how they're mostly 8 wound models, and therefore if you have access to 4 damage weapons, it's worth probably spamming them. Although it is worth remembering that the Shadow Seer, Death Jester and lead player are all 9 wounds. Next, you're going to need to remember that this is a 3 APL team that's very fast, and they might try and deny you the ability to score any primary on turning point 1. It's useful to have the ability to punish this if they rush too far forwards, but also to have the ability to set up multiple ways of 4 APL holds on objectives. If you can't achieve this, then at least having a 3 APL or pseudo 3 APL hold is worthwhile to make sure they don't get a VP rush in the early turning points, and then you can kill those clowns that they've overcommitted with. Consider your abilities to shift APL onto models holding objectives, or use banner optives or APL manipulation optives to reduce the APL of your opponent's control or increase your own on certain objectives. Next, as with all elite teams, you need to really prioritise those ready optives. Each one is able to do a lot of damage and quite explosively. If you continually kill clowns before they activate, it's a good way to ensure you're trading effectively and reduce the killing potential of your opponent's team. Next, we need to talk about their Sadaths and best ways that you can counter them. Firstly, only the leader has the ability during the strategic phase to change their Sadaths between one allegory and another. Therefore, if they overcommit on turning point 1 with their leader, you can kill them before they use that ability and lock them into a suboptimal Sadath for the rest of the game. It's worth noting what their Sadath is they're trying to complete on turning point 1 and make sure you don't give them free tally points during that turning point and allow their leader to make an easy choice to switch into a new Sadath and immediately have the allegory up team-wide for the accolade. This can sound counterintuitive, where sometimes you see a model right in the mid-board they've left out under tragedy, which they're just hoping for you to kill to be able to give themselves 2 tally points, an extra CP, and move on with the rest of the game. So, where possible, deny them that and kill that model in melee instead, or delay their activation in the next turning point. Either way, your objective is to try and reduce their ability to get the accolade as early as possible. If they don't get it until midway through turning point 2 or turning point 3, they're at a massive disadvantage for the rest of the game. And this is the weird way you have to play against this team. You have to be monitoring and denying them Sadath points where you can to reduce their effectiveness and their reliability. As I said, this team is swingy, but they need to force their reliability through ploys and their Sadath abilities. If you can force it to be suboptimal for them, you're into a winning streak. So, that concludes this briefing. What questions do you have? That brings us to the end of this episode. Hopefully you found something new or useful while listening. If you did, throwing us a like would be greatly appreciated, and share this with your friends so they can benefit as well. If you want to make sure you don't miss any episodes, make sure to hit subscribe and select the bell icon so you get notifications as soon as the next episode drops. It really is the best way to help a small channel like ours. If you can't wait and you do want early access, you can join the Patreon, where you get exclusive access to all of our content ahead of time, as well as exclusive videos, access to the Discord, and tournament rewards. If you are an existing Patreon, let me take this moment once again to say a massive thank you for your support. As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so drop a comment below and we'll get right to you. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host Ryan, this has been Turning Point Tactics, and we'll see you next time.